policy, how the delivery was coordinated, and what risks are identified and how they manage. But before we'll get into the questions, would like to introduce ourselves. Deputy Ina Gardiner, Chair of the Common Strategic Policy Scrutiny Review Panel.
Deputy Hilary Jean, Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel.
Deputy Louise Doublé, Chair of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel.
Deputy Lucy Stevenson, I'm the Vice Chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, and the Chair sends her apologies.
Elaine Miller, Minister for Treasury and Resources.
Ian Gorst, Assistant Minister for Treasury and Resources.
Richard Bell, Treasurer of the States.
Andy Hackwell, Group Director of Strategic Finance.
Thank you. And we'll start with the questions about CSP, Common Strategic Policy Delivery. We'll use CSP for the public as it's shorter. How does proposed investment in Treasury contribute to the delivery of the Common Strategic Policy? And if anything within CSP directly connected to a department under your remit?
When you say investment in Treasury, sorry, what do you mean?
Are there any in Common Strategic Policy, we're looking at Common Strategic Policy areas that are connected to the Treasury, apart from overall budget for supporting CSP?
I think probably the only one directly, because our role in Treasury is to allocate the funding to everybody else to deliver what they are trying to deliver under the CSP. So in terms of our own work, I think the only one really that sits directly with us is keeping government fees, duties and charges as low as possible to help the cost of living. So I think that's not something that's, it's not necessarily something we can always control, but that is the thing that sits probably best with Treasury.
Okay, thank you. And we'll actually question the cost of living and contributing to the cost of living a bit later on.
Can I ask just a question on that? Of course, there are some, especially in the area of the ministers that I oversee, there are discussions of new fees and charges. Would that then also be something that you discuss with those ministers in introducing new fees and charges? So it's not just about keeping them low, but whether they're...
If someone was, if a minister was proposing a new charge, then yes, we would be involved in that discussion. We'd be involved in how they set it, how they charge it. So yes, we would be involved in those discussions. And if a department was wanting to increase charges, for example, I had a conversation with a minister and his team yesterday about possible increases to charges. They would discuss those. They should discuss those with me first.
And keeping in mind the CSP of low charges, what are the main messages that you give to ministers in that regard? Are you receptive to those discussions of saying we do need to in some cases increase them, we do need to introduce, or is there a general decision to say no, actually across the board we need to keep them low?
Well, I think all ministers are aware of that CSP priority, that we are trying not to increase charges as much as we can. We are trying not to increase charges. But my view is that generally when people come, there is also, and I'm not sure where this is set out in policy, there's a general policy that charges should not be increased by more than 2.5%. So in any event, people can increase a charge by 2.5%, and that they have power to do that. If they want to increase by more than 2.5%, they need approval. That's delegated to the Treasurer. Normally they're fairly straightforward, but I always see the Treasurer's decisions. We look at Treasurer's decisions every week. If there was anything that was particularly, if the increase was, I use controversial loosely, if there was anything, if it was a slightly bigger increase, or if we thought anything that's slightly difficult or that might not go down well, then the Treasurer would discuss those with me first. But I think when a minister, as what normally happens, in my experience, is that a minister will come forward with a very well-reasoned business case of why they need to go above the 2.5%. There's not a huge number of them. I don't know them somewhere. There's not a huge number of them, but it does happen. And often, I think particularly if you are increasing, if you're increasing quite a small number, and sometimes the charges are very, very small, and if you're increasing a very small number by a small amount financially, so going from £1.50 to £2, that's more than 2.5%, but it's not a massive, that's not necessarily a good example. So yes, the charges in question can be very low. And for example, the discussion I was having yesterday were for charges that look absurdly low that the Minister wants to try and increase.
I suppose where I'm coming from is, say, the Environment Minister talks a lot about the delivery of the services his department do, mainly are funded through fees and charges. And at the same time, we've seen an increase in salaries that are beyond 2.5%. So how does that work where there is a delivery of service, but based on potentially on those fees and charges, but yet the human resources to be able to deliver those services can't be done, or can't. That there's an imbalance between the fees and charges and to be able to deliver that service.
I don't believe that fees and charges are necessarily meeting staff costs. I mean, where the pay rises are funded centrally, Treasury can probably explain this better.
So yes, indeed, pay rises are funded centrally, but you're right to the extent that income will offset some of those. As the Minister says, they will initially come to me in the first case. You are looking at how strong the business case is, how well built the business case is, and whether it's identifying the underlying costs that have increased rather than, in some cases, perhaps not as rigorous. We'll also be looking at, as the Minister says, the extent of the amount of money that's increased, how many people do they impact, how many businesses do they impact. So if you have increases coming through that are raising a small amount of money, that is easier than increases that are coming through that raise large amounts of money and impact more people. So we do balance up against the costs of the service that they pay for. So we've got policies around full or partial cost recovery, and yes, if you've got higher inflation than you're being provided with, those costs will go up. So we take all that into account when we're looking at the decision. Unless they're uncontroversial, I typically will, in the current focus on the cost of living, discuss them with the Minister first before approving. And if they are very significant, whilst I've got a delegation, that doesn't mean to say I can't escalate them to the Minister, and they will be discussed with the Minister directly.
I think it's clear, but what is clear, there is some imbalance, as you said, there is some offsetting, and we need to maybe we'll follow up with written question to understand more specifics around fees and increase within Environment Department. Minister, would you please give one or two examples how you worked with other ministers on coordinating and financial planning to enable their department to deliver their CSP priorities? When and how, for example, you've been involved with other ministers to coordinate financial planning for CSP priorities?
Delivery of CSP priorities is a matter for the relevant minister. So, for example, the minister will go away, develop the policy. They will have a budget or a request for budget. So, for example, this week I have had a conversation with the Minister for Education about the delivery of the additional childcare for 2 to 3 year-olds. So we have had a discussion about how that will be delivered, what the payment mechanisms will be, because that's kind of relevant, how the money goes out the door and are the proper checks and balances there. But in terms of development of policy, that sits with the Minister, and it's the Minister, their Chief Officer, Accountable Officer. They are responsible for making sure that the funding is there and that they are using the funding appropriately. Now, Treasury will oversee that from the perspective of, through the
It's
finance
clear.
business partners.
Sorry, I want to say, I would like to drill down because you brought an example of the education minister, and it's completely fine. Education minister developed the policy.
Yes.
Education minister secured the funding to develop for implementation of this policy. What wasn't clear, for example, from our previous public hearings, how this will be implemented. Would it be with the social security? Would it be with schools? And also how the other part, for example, parents coming back to work and what benefit it would bring to the economy. So there are three ministerial, and it's reducing cost of living, and you have cost of living ministerial group. So have you been part of the discussion across the ministers how it will be implemented across various ministerial portfolio, or you just concentrated with the education minister?
Well, that was the discussion I had with the education minister. Implementation really is a matter for the minister. I don't think I would necessarily get involved with a specific initiative if the minister and their team are responsible for implementation and the appropriate spending of money. And as I say quite a lot, ministers do not report to me in terms of how they are delivering or performing. I'm not checking their homework. I'm not standing there saying, what are you doing? How are you getting on? I mean, if anything, that's for something that might come to COM or the Chief Minister would be involved in. But Treasury will oversee to the extent of movements of money, how it's being spent through the finance business partner.
Can I ask, building on that, so does Treasury have a role in determining whether the way that the funds are allocated gives the best value for money in the use of those funds?
So we will work.
No, that was the
Sorry,
minister.
you say no?
To
Can't.
the minister, please.
Minister,
That's
right,
what we
fine.
like to understand. The Treasury minister. Yes?
I think that's a matter for value for money is a matter for the relevant minister. And they have to deliver a policy in the appropriate way. And they may come and ask questions, but I am not involved in every discussion about every policy, no.
And when you're considering bids for X amount of money, what factors do you take into consideration at that point? Do you consider value for money at that point? Like you said, there would be detailed
The
business
minister will
plans.
come forward with a business case. That will come into the budget process, and it is a council of ministers decision. It's not a Treasury minister's budget. Perhaps it should be. Perhaps we'll get back to that.
So
It is a council of ministers. It will come into the budget process.
Yeah. So you're saying value for money, that's something that COM consider as a whole rather than lying mostly with Treasury?
Can I just, your officials do work
Yes.
to try and ensure that there is value for money.
Yeah.
But as the minister said, ministers have policy ideas in their department. They put they say, oh, well, we think it's going to cost this much, and ministers' officials will from Treasury will talk with the departmental officials to try and ensure during that process that the bid that finally reaches either the minister or the council of ministers table is one, a good use of limited or scarce resources, and B, is showing itself to be value for money. That's not changed. That's how Treasury officials have always sought to work carefully with departments to do that. It's not always well liked in departments, of course, but it really is important to show to islanders that there is consideration of value for money as well as the wider policy initiatives before it even gets to the Treasury Minister or Council of Ministers.
Thank you.
And just building on that and taking it a little bit further, there are a number of examples that certainly on the two panels I sit on that we've come across so far of projects that are included in this budget that actually we are told the details aren't there yet. There's social security, for example. I can think of a pot of, I think, £1.8 million, which we've been told, yes, it's for these areas, but there are no details yet. Health has further ones for the introduction of fees and charges. There's no details yet. How does that marry up with what you've just told us, ministers, about value for money?
Me to do it, or
Well, I think to say there's no details. I mean, we know what We are suggesting, we know what the Minister is proposing. We know that the Minister is proposing the kind of back to school bonus, which will help lower income families with the cost of school uniforms. Now, by the time that rolls in, they will be working through. There is no point them doing lots and lots of work until they know they have that money. So they will have the pot of money and they will then work on the details to have that going out the door in the summer for September, I imagine, is what the Minister's trying to do. Similarly, with adjusting pensioner benefits, she will have an idea, and we've been presented with, I think she's looking at expanding Pension Plus. So those details are things that the officers will then crack down on, and they have systems, where it's benefits already in place that are being enhanced. That's not a difficult thing to do because the systems are there. Where it's a new benefit, so the back to school bonus, there are other mechanisms like community cost bonus as to how they then set up that new benefit on their system and how they pay it. So I think having everything, the Minister has come forward with a business case which says, I would like this amount of money to pay these benefits, and I'm sure there's some kind of breakdown as to how it will be. But the details will follow once the money has actually been allocated, because until the budget has been approved, nobody can assume it would be, I'm sure they're thinking about the big picture of what they might do, but to spend a lot of officer time planning benefits to then find that somebody brings in a proposition saying, no, let's not give the Minister that amount of money, they've wasted time.
So I think there's a balance to be struck, isn't there,
Yes, there is balance.
in that process. And just to round off that point, you're satisfied as Treasury Minister that you have all the details within Treasury that you needed to be able to make those decisions, to present those proposals to the States Assembly, who at the end of the day are being asked as members to endorse those proposals?
Yes, I think so.
I mean, I would say those decisions are Council of Ministers'
They are
decisions.
Council Minister's decisions, yes.
They're not, their law doesn't, it's not the Minister's or Treasury's decision. Treasury is there trying to create that balance, as you said, with officials and getting a reasonably high level. This is roughly what the policy is, but what the basic calculations look like. You get the money in the budget, Council of Ministers decide what's in and what's out and whether it needs finessing, because there's another policy that might be equal priority but has currently got no money, and then that way you come up then with ultimately with the budget proposal. But balance, the word you used, is really a good one.
Yeah.
To follow up on Deputy Stevenson's questions, across the panels, we are finding that, as well as not as much detail as we would like, that policies and bids are being developed very much in isolation. Can you make any comment on how integrated policy making happens across government and what your role as Treasury Minister has been in that?
Well, I think all of these policies, where there's growth money, where there's new money, if you like, for CSP, the relevant business cases have all been sent to Council Ministers. So again, Council Ministers were sent business cases, where we read them all, business cases are very complex documents. But the relevant minister and their team will have had to create a business case. Those will have come to those were circulated, I'm right in thinking, to Council Ministers. We were all sent with the business cases, as well as summaries as to what the overall proposal and policy was. So those decisions, as the Assistant Minister says, are made by Council Ministers. It's not a Treasury Minister decision. So yes, there is an element of people do know. We discussed it. We would have had discussion about. I remember more than one discussion about the extending childcare. We have discussed all of these things. We discussed some of the health bids as to what those are going to comprise.
How much did you scrutinize, for example, if I'm thinking about previous investment that has been done, what it achieved and how extra money was allocated? And one of the things that coming into the mind, creating loving homes that I think and do the children social care reform were allocated, I think in excess of 24 million for the 4 years. And have been presented.
When
23-26 was allocated 24 million over the 4 years, and it was creating loving home and to do the reform of the social care. have the department presented what's happened with this investment and how this investment was used, what the outcomes before you agreed to extra 12 million allocation for the children homes? I'm not saying if it's right or wrong, I'm asking about the process that Treasury gone through looking for the outcomes of the 20. Don't
Well,
catch me on
that is a
that
Treasury
investment.
question, that's a question for
No,
the
but you as a Treasury
officials.
Minister, have you been presented with this?
We have had more than one presentation by Children's Services about what they have done and what they need to do now.
So you were reassured that
We have been given more than one presentation from Children's Services, from the Chief Social Worker, about what they've done, what the challenges still are, and why they need more money. And it is very difficult to find suitable property. You'll know that yourself, to find a suitable property with the amount of scale, getting the right people to come and look after a very small number of children. So yes, we are reported in terms of how they are getting on.
so you will attend how it was spent and extra. Okay, we'll go back. Yeah.
Thank you. Were any
But
joint
that also goes to, that is the responsibility, how money is spent. Money is allocated to a department for policy. The chief officer, the accountable officer in that department, is responsible for the spend of that money. If they don't spend it, let's say they don't spend it in the year, they would have to come to us and either explain whether it goes back into the pot or whether it's an ongoing project, it gets rolled forward. That is something that happens at Treasury official level. And then if there is a case of money being moved into a different head of expenditure or between years, that is a decision that then comes to me once the Treasury officials are happy with it. And that happens at officer level.
Were any joint business cases submitted between different ministers?
I can't recollect really.
Off the top of my head, I don't recall
I
that there
don't
were.
recall any.
Okay, and in what ways?
Not for this year. I
No,
think
that's
in
Not for
previous
this year.
years we have had business
Yeah,
cases
that's
that have required resources from more than one department. So that has happened, but I don't recall any this year. I'll
Okay, and in what ways is Treasury involved in integrated policy making and allocation of funds across issues such as the ageing population, falling birth rates and cost of living?
That would be driven by council of ministers. Council of ministers would have to set policy. They would then have to, the budget would have to be found and it would be monitored in the usual way.
And do you feel that there is a clear policy that has been set across the Council of Ministers so that you can refer to when making judgments about fund allocations?
I'm not sure it's right to say, you're suggesting that I have more responsibility.
No, we're asking you as a
and
minister. We ask
actual
every minister.
Than I do. We are clear that we need to address the ageing population, and I think where that touches a minister's portfolio, they will be thinking about that. But that then drills down into individual ministerial actions and individual ministerial policies.
In your view as a minister, has the narrowing focus to a limited set of priorities worked?
I think for where you have a government that only had 2 years, so we effectively had 2 years, and I think the Chief Minister, which the Council of Ministers agreed, that the thing to do when you have a short period of time is to highlight things that can be delivered within that time. And I think our tracking of the CSP is that, we have clearly delivered some things already and other things are on track for delivery.
Has it exposed any challenges by narrowing the priorities?
I can't say I would identify any.
It's just we heard from the Environment Minister yesterday that the proposed budget cuts will have a profound impact on his department's work. And I'm wondering, did you discuss in detail with the Environment Minister to understand fully these challenges and impact it will have on Jersey's environment, the economy, statutory obligations and planning? Because, of course, his department is wide-ranging and not just focused on specific environmental issues.
The Environment Minister has come to Council Ministers. We have discussed with him certain specific policy aspects at Council Ministers. But the Environment Department has had 118% growth in recent years, which is 58% in real terms. and that included money for regulatory improvement, housing and food licensing schemes, and UK EU, TCA biosecurity border control. So money has been provided, and the department has grown from, let me just see, 2020, just over 5 million, 2025, 11.7 million, and this year there is a reduction. So the notion that environment has been constantly squeezed is not, is perhaps misleading. There has been considerably more money has gone in over the last few years into environment, perhaps more recently than further south, but they have seen real growth. All departments are being asked to,
but not necessarily in the sense because they have to deal with regulation. It's not necessarily because of them asking that. Of course, we had, in Brexit, so of course that comes kind of in sent from external relations, increasing that. Or you've got, for example, the housing minister's RTL means that the environment minister has to do some regulation around that. It is potentially other ministers and their policy making that makes it that that department specifically has to have work done in that area. In a way, it is a cross-departmental department in that sense.
yes, but I would imagine, I would be surprised if the housing department aren't speaking to environment. Environment know a laws in train, and I'd be astonished if they're not making representations about. And we have heard from the minister. And when the law's passed, there will then be a bid to the extent that environment needs more resource to implement the new law. They will have to ask for it.
Yeah,
But I think
if
that-
I could make a point, it's as much a structural point as anything else in my view, and there is a conflict between what government and the states are asking the Environment Department to do, and when we use the word environment, it doesn't really capture
I agree.
the responsibilities of that department. It's the regulatory bit of that department which is struggling, and there is a conflict of which everybody acknowledges of, on the one hand, the CSP priority is to keep fees and charges low. On the other hand, that regulatory bit of the minister's department has historically been given a mandate to say, just a minute, these regulatory things, you should be trying to do cost recovery. And then you've got the cost of living overlay as well. So you've got at least two CSPs which are pulling that department in a direction which
I think this is why I was asking these questions.
which it's now struggling with. I mean, the minister and I have got the consumer credit law, which again will put some responsibilities on a part of the regulatory element of the environment minister's department, and we've had to say to him, look, you may have additional costs in due course. We will have to then think about, is there an allocation from our budget, or we'll have to consider that to deliver that. I think if we look at that now from a structural perspective, it seems that potentially the priority that regulation needs in our modern world, where people are asking more of them, the media is filled with people who want the regulatory department to do more things. We've got to balance that with business growth. The question I think we have to ask is it really sitting in the right place anymore? Or would it be much better having the full influence of the Chief Minister's office? And I know you've got the Chief Minister later, but it seems to me that there is potential for it to move to be more of the more understanding across government about the challenges that they face.
And I think also, where you are talking about regulation, where you have got, you've got the CSP of keeping charges, fees and charges as low as possible. That's, I think, that's one thing where you're talking about fees and charges that hit individuals, that hit families and households. If those fees and charges are hitting commercial profit-making businesses, I think for me, there is a slightly different view that could be taken. And I think we possibly do need to think about whether the charges applied in that department are actually commercial. Now, government shouldn't be making a profit, but I think we should be looking more to where we are regulating businesses and commercial enterprise. When you look at what they're getting for what they're paying for, I think there is scope to look at the charging structure as well. That's my opinion. I think I think the Minister may agree with me.
Thank you. And coming back to something that you said, Minister, earlier, and your own opinion of you made a comment about whether this is a Council of Ministers making this decision or whether the Treasury, and looking ahead, are there any changes you would recommend to strengthen the link between financial planning and the next common strategic policies, if this is going to be going in the future where there's this kind of marrying of priorities?
Well, I think we would like to. I don't fully understand the changes that were made. I think previously the Treasury Minister did have a greater role and influence. I think we would like to go back to a multi-year budget cycle, because the yearly cycle is very time consuming for everybody, and it has also, I think the reality of that is it has also led to more costs, because people have the idea that they can come forward every single year and ask for more money. That is something we have really tried to restrain this year and last year, but this year it was, you know, we have not accepted just, well, we have tried to limit growth bids to CSP priorities and risk items, so the money that's gone into the emergency control room and the fire service. But I think there has been a general view in some departments that the budget process is, well, we want 3 new staff, let's throw in a business case and see what we get. So that has led to a burgeoning. So I think if we can come back to multi-year, that would help us, and it would give departments better flexibility to use their money more wisely within a 3-year period and not have the money moving around in year end. So I think that's something we would like to move towards.
What needs to happen in order for that change to
I think
take
when
effect?
law changes. Yeah.
Is that something that you're working on?
Yes.
When would that come to the Assembly?
Be next year.
We're prioritising the work on the Capital Investment Fund. At the same time, we are progressing with our thinking on taking the pros and cons from both systems, because there were issues with the 3-year plan. Let's be clear, but getting the best out of both of those, we're thinking through that. The Minister has also asked us to brief her on the changes that came through in the Public Finances Law in 2019. What changes that, if you like, took responsibilities away from the Treasury Minister and placed them with council ministers and elsewhere. What were they? And we're going to brief her on those. In terms of, Capital Fund, we are bringing forward so that it can be debated by this Assembly. We are advancing the thinking on quite well advanced on it, but that won't be ready to consider legislation changes from this Assembly be available for the incoming government.
Okay, and as part of that, would there be more certainty able to be given to charities, for example, receiving grants over a planned 3-year cycle rather than annually?
Yeah, so when we talk about 3 years, let's be clear, when we moved to the current model, the intent was it is a 4-year plan.
Yeah.
But because of the way the legislation works, it allows all governments to just come back, and all Assembly members to come back and change that on an annual basis. A medium-term plan sets budgets for departments for 3 years based upon the income forecast. The variations in income then become an issue for the Treasury to address, in what you would probably address that through an annual budget with a smaller b, if you like, that adjusts taxation and such like. But the risk there, of course, is that the income forecast comes down in the meantime. So therefore, you need to think about how you would fund that in the meantime to be able to assure departments of that funding, and therefore those entities that are reliant upon that funding. That's one of the areas we're looking at now in terms of potentially, as I'm sure you may raise your eyebrows, slightly different view, a slightly different purpose for a stabilisation fund that goes beyond the economic cycle, but that would necessitate topping up the stabilisation fund.
Thank you. Some
It's,
brief.
it's important to think about the number of years in line with the economic cycle. So the frustration in 20, whatever it was, the previous government came in, 2 governments ago, sorry, was that ministers were coming in and weren't able to influence their departmental budgets for at least 2 years. So you have to have probably a 3 and a 1, and you probably want to have the 1 coinciding with an election period so you can get that done, and then you can think about, you have a year to think about the 3 years, the last year of which there will be an election, so they'll have that, the remainder of that year set, but then they can do the 3 year. So it can be done. I think we can learn from what we did previously.
Would you think it will be brought to the Assembly before the election?
The Treasurer would know the
I don't think the move to the medium-term financial planning, if you like, the 3-year plan would be ready this side of the election to be debated, whether we get the opportunity to advance that law drafting so that it's at least lodged.
Okay, but let's go back to CSP. Thank you. It was a good discussion. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Some brief questions now, I think, because we're noticing we've got 20 minutes left. In terms of cross-cutting issues, another that we'd like to ask questions about is demographic change, so ageing population and falling birth rates. How is the Treasury factoring these social factors into long-term fiscal planning? Can you give some specific examples?
So firstly, of course, we've been working long-term capital plan. The demographic impacts feed into the long-term capital plan. Secondly, building on top of the work that the economics unit's done, which has been there for a couple of years, that demonstrates in particular the impacts on the costs that feeds into the population size and what that population may need to be doing with an ageing population. We're planning on building on that into our longer term forecast. So we do a forecast as it is at the moment on income and expenditure, and we want to move, and it's in our business plan to do so, but longer term aspiration, hopefully get a lot of the work done on that for the next council as they come in, so that we've got like a 10-year income and expenditure plan, and beyond that longer. The Minister, of course, sits on the group chaired by the Health Minister in respect of longer term funding for health, which of course is heavily driven by what we're seeing ahead of us in terms of the ageing demographic in particular. So those are 2 examples. We work from time to time with our colleagues in SIPES in respect of the demographic impacts that are pushing through in their system and the inefficiencies that are there with that reducing demographic in the number of schools we have, for example. So we work with them as well. Those are examples.
Thank you. And are there any policy decisions that have been made as a result of this information that you've shared with other ministers?
So it's in its early days. It's not in its early days. It's not at the position to bring forward into policy decisions relating to health, but that has led us as in this budget to be convinced that the level of inflation that's usually given to health needs to step up. So we've gone for an additional 1% over above the current 2% policy for this first year, whilst we work towards a longer term policy.
Okay.
It's also led, of course, the other additional money to health, about health IT and health prevention.
Prevention, yes.
Yeah. Is there a coherent strategy or action plan that brings all of this together that all ministers understand and are working from?
There's the I'm sure there are various, so that you've got the Ageing Well roadmap, which I think is looking at infrastructure issues, and I think everybody is generally looking forward. I mean, we do need the long-term investing in Jersey. I think includes things like investment in sheltered housing. I'm sure Andy and GDC will be thinking about. I mean, they're now. They'll be thinking about right sizing, about building accommodation that's suitable for right sizing. So yes, I think there is, everybody is aware of it, we're thinking about it, education are very aware of what the demographics are doing in schools. It's probably one of the reasons why they want this one, why we've all voted for one single new school in town.
Minister, I would like to pick up something
You've
from
got,
ageing
sorry, the other
let's-
thing, you've got the Future Jersey
And the Future
document, which
Jersey, yes.
sort of frames the
I would like
balance
to
that you
ask,
need to
sorry,
have.
a very specific question, and to seek your views, and if it's happening already, it's great. Aging population, it needs strategic vision. Aging population spend, we can see in housing, we can see aging population spent in health, we see aging population spent in social security. So there are challenges there across departments that each department needs to address. Do you think in the future we need to have integrated funding across department that it will be around aging population, or will continue to give? So does it need to be integrated to ensure that we are spending correctly and with achieving the outcomes?
I'm not sure if it's a question of integrated funding, but I think everybody is working, as you say, you know, the things do not necessarily link. You know, health, somebody could be living quite happily in their home and have health issues, some could not have health issues. Everybody will be different and everybody will have different needs. Everybody will want different accommodation, will need different care needs. So I think the Minister will be looking at things like long-term care, introduction of the new pension scheme, which, you know, I'm very sad that didn't happen in this term. So I think to set aside a pot of money for the ageing population would be difficult. I think what's more important is a strategy and what it's going to be and what each policy is, what each policy.
So this is why we have a
area
strategy and
is
how
going
much
to
budget it
be.
will require and how it will be distributed to not each
It
department.
may very well be that someone is working on that there is a strategy, but it's
Okay,
not.
we'll move on. Thank you.
So
No,
can
for
I-
the cost of living.
well, if the Minister is absolutely right, that you wouldn't just think about having a pot of money across lots of departments, but I interpret your question in a slightly different way, and it comes back to it, facing the future challenges of Jersey, whether they be my challenges in the economy. Are we set up as a government to deal with those challenges? Are we actually structured as a government to deal with these big challenges that you were asking us about? Health and ageing demographic and skills, and then you've got the others that flow on from that. That for me is an open question, because our structures are still reasonably old-fashioned, dealing with, to some extent, with yesterday's silo problems. Is it right the way we're currently structured? And obviously the Chief Minister might comment on that more.
Yeah.
And I think if we look at that question openly, we might then look at some of the things you're thinking about. Should there be a minister for the ageing demographic with a budget to cross-cut those things?
Yeah.
I don't think there is a good answer yet to that, but I do think it is a question that should be asked.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's another cross, it's cost of living.
Yeah,
which
moving on.
Deputy Sims.
Cost of living, and we spoke fairly in depth about the fees and charges at the beginning, which is I think one of the CSP priorities and linked to the cost of living. I won't go over all of that again, but can you set out, has any analysis been conducted to show how that aim to keep those fees and duties and charges as low as possible, how it will impact different income groups, particularly low-income households?
I think the economists look at all of those kind of things.
Is there...
But, you know, it's to me, there's almost a kind of, isn't it, you know, if you are giving someone something, that has to be a benefit to them, that has to make a difference. If somebody gets £500 from the cost of living, whatever they do with that, they have had a benefit of £500. Someone who gets additional childcare will have had a benefit, or that is clearly of value to them. I'm not sure I understand your question, because you could either give
Let
them
me
a
rephrase
benefit.
it. In terms of the fees and duties and charges and the CSP priority of keeping those as low as possible to help islanders with the cost of living, how does government know that those two things link together, and how is government measuring that keeping those duties, fees and charges as low as possible is actually helping islanders?
I don't believe we do work on an annual basis. I think when we did in 23, we did some work about the mini budget. We did some work to show what had happened. But to me, it's kind of self-fulfilling. You know, we can't... we kind of know. I think there are data. We know what the impacts will be for a lot of things.
I mean, the statistics
And
jersey,
you can
inflation.
statistics jersey measure things. The economists measure things. But I think you know, there is a cost. If you want to constantly monitor and do field research, there's a cost, and that is counterproductive.
Okay. Do you think the work on minimum income standards that's going to happen soon will help in that process?
Well, certainly the minister does. The minister is very keen on getting the minimum income standards. What the minimum income standards will do, that will first of all, my understanding is set out what it is you need. So first of all, it's not necessarily there will be focus groups of various different types of households, and they will decide what it is that that household needs to have a reasonable standard of living, and then from that need, the minimum income will then develop across the different categories. And I think having a minimum income standard will then help us in terms of, are benefits right? Are they targeted? Are they at the right level? Are they targeted properly? Are they reaching the right people? Are they providing support for the right things? So I think they have potential, but I think I've said before, I'm not as totally convinced, but I'm
You're not the odd one. I agree with you, Minister.
I'm the lone voice on that group, because we know other jurisdictions have got minimum income standards and then completely ignore them because they either can't use them, or they can't mark them, or they can't afford them.
Which I think brings
But
me
that
nicely
work
to
is
my
progressing.
final question.
That work is progressing, and it should. I believe it's going to start early next year.
Okay. Because one of the things I think that minimum income standards could do is help with some of that cross-cutting thinking, enabling departments to kind of see and stand back and take a wider issue. But on that point, are there any examples of cross-departmental initiatives where fee reductions or keeping them as low as possible, I don't think we've had any reductions, have we? But have been used strategically to reduce household pressures? How are departments working together?
Well, not increasing a charge is a different thing from supporting a family who needs money. So by not increasing, a family may not have a car, so not increasing fuel duties will have no impact. A family who doesn't have a car, a household that doesn't smoke, which doesn't drink, will not be impacted by changes in duties, but that family may still be struggling. So the minister will then look to see what inflation's doing. It's not necessarily what other departments think. The minister doesn't, the minister will look at a wider picture. She'll look at what inflation's doing, where the levels of need are, what all her sources of information are telling her, where the pockets of need are, and that is how you structure benefit. But keeping charges, not changing fuel duty, is of no impact one way or the other to a household that doesn't have a car. So it's a difficult thing.
It is, but it is your
monitor.
Government's CSP priority
Yes,
that links
but we are still
the two
trying
things
to,
together. in a way.
again, to me, it's kind of stating the obvious. If we are not increasing a charge, then that is beneficial to anybody who's not paying the increased charge. Now, there will always be people who benefit and people who don't benefit, and the people who don't benefit at the lower income end, that will be picked up through things like income support and other benefits.
Thank you. Thank you. Minister, the mortgage interest tax relief, which is being phased out, will be gone completely by next year. But given the cost of living pressures, do you believe this is the right time to do that? And has that been reconsidered at all?
Well, we have to make a response to that. I think the petition has exceeded 1,000. So we will be doing a response. But when we discussed it on a preliminary basis, the answer to that was that no, I don't think we will. It's in the last year. I think retaining it will make a very, very small amount of difference. I can't remember the numbers, but it makes a very small difference to the households that do have it. And there are lots of people, even who do have mortgages, who don't get it. It's only people with marginal rate who get it. And we also have to bear in mind that you are giving a benefit to people who have a capital asset that you would think will be appreciating in value, where people in rent accommodation are not getting that benefit. So it was phased out. I think we have to remember that I think the Assembly took the decision in 2015, and it has been phased out over a 10-year period. And I think certainly our preliminary assessment was that there would be very little value to stopping that programme, and that to the extent people need support, it would be better to target it more appropriately.
Minister, at a scrutiny panel hearing yesterday, we heard the Housing Minister was not in agreement with the reduction in stamp duty on non-main residence properties as proposed in the budget. Yet I believe that in a CSSP hearing...
I misunderstood the position, and I apologise for that. I had understood that there had been or were going to be discussions with the Minister, and that he was accepting of it. I think he doesn't. I think he is, and I think that is not untrue in the sense that it's not part of his policy, but he is accepting of it as a member of the Council of Ministers, and as a whole, the Council of Ministers support it. So it's not something, he's not flat. If I create an impression that he was all for it, that's wrong. But he is accepting of the change as part of the Council of Ministers.
And do you believe this stamp duty on non-main residence properties, so those who already have a home, and we were just talking about the cost of living pressures on those who have one home or don't even have a home, they have to rent. But these are, do you believe that this is a fair balance when we're talking with the cost of living crisis, that there is this reduction of stamp duty for non-main residence properties?
Well, the decision was taken on the, we have to be aware that the market has slowed considerably. And certainly when I voted for that 3% in 2022, which I think is when we voted for it, it was implementing a scrutiny recommendation that was already in place. It was because I heard lots of people that summer telling me their children couldn't buy flats because they were being crowded out by landlords. And I certainly voted for it on the basis that it was going to create a more level playing field between first-time buyers and landlords. I think in that time since then, we have seen much increased interest rates. We've seen other things that landlords tell us are dissuading them, and we have seen a definite cooling in the market. So the reducing by 1%, and I'm sure there are people who would like to go further, we reduced by 1% as almost as a kind of pilot to see what the implication was. People buying second homes are still paying 2% more, and for some people that is still a considerable sum of money. The 3%, some people are saying it's an extra 23,000. I can't remember the value of flats. People saying they were paying an extra £23,000 in stamp duty. So that is a considerable amount of money. People will still be paying more. So the reduction of 1% was, we will affect this to listen to all the voices that are telling us the rental market, maybe the impacts on the rental market are worrisome. So to try and address some of those aspects.
My question before we continue, would you have extra 10 minutes for us, or you need to go? I'm not sure. How's your... we have two areas quickly.
I do, but I'll be back again in 10
Okay,
minutes.
not more than 10
Because-
minutes. Maybe it will be less. Okay, maybe it will be 5. Okay, one area, and it will be 2 areas that we would like to question. One area is 20 million that were allocated to support packages for the employers in the transition to the minimum wage. During public hearing with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, he said that he doesn't have a way, the department doesn't, and Treasury Business doesn't have a way to know if the businesses, after support that they would receive, they will continue to trade. So the question was, if we'll provide 2 years of support, what insurance do I have that after 2 years businesses will continue to trade and not fold because of the transitions to a minimum wage? So my question, I mean, obviously Jersey business gives support and lessons, but there's no real way to for us to know that what situation is business before, and we don't know if it will. So my question to yourself and the treasurer: how do you ensure that business support is targeted, accountable, fiscally sustainable, and to ensure that the public money that was spent on support the businesses basically will not be wasted if business folding after 2 years?
Well, again, I kind of think that's something that the economy department should be thinking about. If they are responsible for the payment of that fund, they should be working with Jersey Business to try to seek such assurances. I think there's a council perfection there. Again, I mean, there were probably businesses that were supported during COVID that have collapsed since. They had the benefit, and when the benefit's not there, the thinking, I believe very clearly, is that the Better Business Support Package funding, which has been well, I believe it has been well. I saw a slide on it the other day, but I don't have the papers, and I'm not good. I don't remember all the numbers because there are lots of numbers in terms of how the money's been spent. But it is aimed at promoting skills. It was aimed at helping people bring on apprentices. And I would think, to me, if somebody has an apprentice, after 2 years, if they keep that apprentice, that person should then be able to generate a better income source. They can work on their own. You would think those are all things that should work. If the apprentice decides to leave and they're back to square one, if something else happens in that business, if we have some kind of economic issue, you cannot guarantee, I don't think you can guarantee that by having government support, a business is then on a trajectory to future success. You would certainly like to think so, and you would like to think the businesses also have to put in some of their own money. They're investing their own money. So it would be very, very disappointing if a business fails having had that support. If they're using it, the money's to help produce productivity. If they're more productive, they should be more profitable.
And so, but it's interesting that this is what lessons have been learned from the COVID business support, and what businesses survive, and what lessons were learned from that business support to minimize outcome here. I don't know.
So I would, if I take the COVID issue, I mean, you can't. It's very difficult to think you're going to learn a lesson for everyday activity from what happened during COVID. It was an absolute imperative that if we had not done the support, particularly the job support, businesses would have gone under, and islanders would have lost their job, and our economy would not be, wouldn't really be in existence today. So I think that is a totally separate issue. You could argue that the thing that the Treasury Department gets criticised for about its COVID support now is that it should have sought to follow up particularly loans and get those repaid earlier rather than having the latitude that it's had. But anyway, that's a slightly different issue. My view about you asking a question
about
which was inevitable when we decided to allocate that money in the way that we did. If you're giving support to businesses, you cannot guarantee that that business will survive, because the business is in a commercial market environment. The best you can hope for is that you give that business, with that support, the best possible opportunity of managing the increase in the minimum wage. But there can be no guarantees.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because businesses have to respond to the living wage. You know, they will have to make a decision. Apart from, can they become more productive? Can they upskill their staff? Can they train apprentices? They also have to manage their business, and that is, I now have a bigger cost, and I've made these savings. How can I increase my prices? They may have to increase their prices. How do they authorise a business? You know, those are business decisions
I
that
mean,
only the
yeah, and
business
if you
can make.
move, absolutely, no, I completely understand. And this is actually the apprentices funding was not requested according to the Sustainable Economic Development Minister, because
take
from
up
various,
than
it was
expected,
much
yes.
more a request and for the funding.
Although
But
I
moving
think-
to the fiscal
I think
policy.
that may change, because I think at the time that was launched, that the apprenticeship funding was launched, that was at a time when we had removed, the Assembly had decided to remove the trainee wage, and we all did that again for good reason. But the lack of a trainee wage was also dissuading people from taking apprenticeships, regardless of the support, I think. So now that the trainee wage is back, you would like to think that people will be taking on more apprentices and may then use more of that support.
Thank you. Move to the last part. Yeah.
Thank you. Minister, I'm quoting from the Fiscal Policy Panel advice, and they state that drawdowns from the Social Security Reserve Fund should only be made on the basis of a comprehensive actuarial assessment of future pension liabilities. The decision in Budget 2026 to withdraw funds and cut the contribution to the fund before the results of the 2025 actuarial review are published is not prudent. What is your response to this advice?
That wording is quite unhelpful in some ways, because there is no withdrawal being made from the fund. There is no drawdown being made from the fund by government. The only withdrawals and drawdowns from the Social Security Reserve Fund are to pay pensions. They pay pensions and they pay social benefits under the Social Security law. Government is reducing the grant. That is a difficult thing. We will still put £184 million into the fund. We believe that the fund will continue to grow. We did have actuarial advice before that was confirmed, before that strategy was confirmed finally. There will be an actuarial review being instructed on a routine basis now. The funds are reviewed by actuaries every 3 years. Those reviews take some considerable time, so we could not have, there seems to be a view that we could have had a full actuarial review in time for the government plan. We couldn't, because they take months and months and months. So we couldn't have that. This is a temporary measure. We believe the fund is, we have a very well funded fund which has continued to grow. Treasury, it was initially, I believe, and we've got some numbers which are quite complicated. The fund was the Social Security Reserve Fund was initially meant to cover up to 5 times annual demand. It is now covering over 7 times annual demand. We're not with any jurisdiction that has the reserve funding for pensions that we have.
Yeah. So, Minister, you mentioned that it was a temporary cut in
It
the
is a
contributions.
Cut.
However, it's going to be funding recurring projects such as the increase in the allocations for the Pension Plus scheme, which could potentially get bigger and bigger with the ageing population. So, is it a temporary cut in contributions? And if not, and the contributions will be restored, where will the money come from in future to fund all of the projects? Can I ask the Minister to answer that one?
You're
Yeah, the Minister, please, because if you can give us an answer.
Well, as we've said, we accept absolutely the advice of the panel that funding, spending has to be reined in. We have tried to do that. We have started a programme of trying to rein in spending. We will be doing more of that. And as I've also said in these hearings, everybody has a part to play in that. So everybody needs to look at what they're asking government to do. Government is probably spending too much. We need to look.
So that recurring funding, the social security, the cut in the contributions, the recurring funding, the projects that is going towards, you're saying that in future those will be funded by cuts or savings from other areas
Or other income.
What plans?
Well, it's
do you
not
have
just
for that?
cuts. It's a programme that will affect all departments, and you're getting to technicalities that I can't answer.
I think what we'd like to know across all of the chairs is what is the plan across government for funding.
Well, you then need to
these-
speak to the treasurer, who has the technical knowledge.
But can we get in highlights if it's extra income, where the income in one sentence will come from? or the cut, because we don't need to go into the technical details that really we respect. We would like to understand in short 2-3
I
lines.
have to ask the Treasurer to remind me where the extra income's coming from, because I don't.
I also think, and it's something that Deputy Dublé highlighted, you know, when we, as states members, will be asked to vote on something that apparently will be temporary, but we don't have the understanding of that it will be temporary. There is nothing behind that word temporary, and I think that is where we're trying to seek comfort in understanding that it actually will be temporary, and I think that is still an unknown, and that's why these questions are being asked.
If you perhaps let the Treasurer.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I won't be technical in any case. So we went back slightly to previous hearings at the start of the budget setting process. There wasn't the usual Treasury-led growth process. I believe that at the time we had eyebrows raised from the other side of the table in scrutiny hearings. These are not in the usual sense because of the state of the state of the finances in terms of income having reduced slightly and underlying inflation pushing up costs. There are a number of strategic pieces of work that look to the future in terms of funding health, for example. We've talked about that. And there is also a piece of work ongoing that looks at the significant growth in the public sector since 2018-19 to now, and those numbers have been well rehearsed, in particular through the Chief Executive. Looking at how some of that increased expenditure can be reversed is a piece of work that is ongoing. It is not there in time for this particular budget, but the pressures that ministers felt today, they needed to, in the meantime, fund. We needed to come up with a strategy of funding. There are limited options there outside of tax increases, and the Council of Ministers is very clear that they did not want to increase significant taxes at this particular point, given the cost of living crisis that I think you've identified elsewhere. Yes. You'd like me to carry on?
No, I think that
Right. So
we get our answers.
so,
Can you explain what does it mean, unusual Treasury-led process?
usual Treasury-led process.
Oh,
So
usual,
usual, you will have been.
It wasn't. No, it
You will
wasn't.
have experienced in the past as a minister a
What
growth
wasn't?
process that invited a lot of growth. Well, we didn't invite a lot of growth bids, but we had a lot of growth bids in the past. And we've said that this time round, against the backdrop of curbing the growth in public sector, we would not be doing so. We will only be looking at where there are significant risks or already identified CSP initiatives to fund.
I mean, this is clearly, to my mind, a bridging budget.
Yeah.
It starts to address some of those long-term, or addresses some of the long-term issues that you've been questioning the minister about, but it isn't sustainable. You just look at the numbers. You can't use your reserve for your everyday spending. It's clear. It was clear from FPP. It's clear to ministers. It's clear to the public. It's only going to bridge to the next government, who will have to think hard and consult with the public about what is going to happen into the future. And you've only got a few levers to actually pull. One is, as we know, increase taxes. One is cut expenditure. One is grow your economy, so you've got greater income lines coming in, or a balance of those things, or a combination of those things. And I think that a lot of the questions you've asked today are really hinting at that. What does the future actually hold for us? Because we cannot get into the position of some jurisdictions of either racking up lots of debt. £1 in every £10 in the United Kingdom is spent on paying down debt. It's ridiculous. Or some of our neighbour jurisdictions where they are running down their reserves because you're fundamentally undermining your public finances. It's a bridging plan. That's what we're saying. And that's because you can't keep doing those same things with any of the reserves that you've got. Because what the FPP says about the Social Security Reserve Fund and ideally wanting an actuarial review, I understand entirely. but it's got much stronger, firmer, more difficult things to say about the strategic reserve, which is nowhere near where it should be.
Okay.
And it also commented, they also said Jersey's business model was not necessarily would not necessarily like more taxes. So they recognise as well the challenges of increasing tax, which nobody wants to increase tax. Nobody wants to pay more tax.
Thank you very much for your time and thank you for extra minutes. And